Vaughn Aldridge threw the folder onto the dining room table so hard that the papers inside scattered. Quarterly reports, wire transfer confirmations, a printed email chain, fanning out across the white linen like evidence at a crime scene, which, as it turned out, is exactly what they were. Cecily Aldridge, 36 years old, executive director of the Aldridge Family Foundation, stood at the far end of that table and did not flinch. She had been standing in this room for 4 minutes already. She had watched her husband walk in from the garage, loosen his tie, pour himself 2 fingers of scotch without offering her any, and then throw that folder. She had done the math on what that sequence meant before he said a single word. "You went into my office," Vaughn said. "It was not a question." "I went into our building," Cecily said, "which my name is also on." Vaughn Aldridge, 41 years old, Chief Operating Officer of Aldridge Capital Ventures, a private equity firm managing close to $3 billion in combined assets, looked at his wife the way people look at things that have started behaving unexpectedly. Not with anger exactly. With recalibration. Those files were confidential, then they shouldn't have been misfiled into the Foundation's quarterly archive. She paused, which Renata did, by accident, and which I found, also by accident. He took a long drink of the scotch. The ice shifted. "What do you think you saw?" he said. Cecily had been married to this man for 9 years. She knew what that question really was. It was not curiosity. It was a boundary being drawn. "I think I saw what I saw," she said. She left the room. He did not follow her. The Foundation offices were on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, and they smelled like fresh coffee and printer toner and the particular kind of quiet that comes from people working very hard at something they believe in. Cecily had built that atmosphere deliberately. She had hired people who cared. She ran literacy programs, workforce re-entry initiatives, a college scholarship fund that had put 47 kids through school in the past 6 years. The Foundation operated on a $12 million annual budget, funded primarily through Aldridge Capital's community reinvestment allocations, which were on paper mandated by the firm's own charter. On paper. What Cecily had found in that misfilled archive was a set of vendor payment records that did not match anything in the Foundation's own ledgers. Payments to an entity called Ridgeline Community Consulting LLC. $40,000 here, $60,000 there. Over 18 months, just under $900,000, drawn from the Foundation's operating accounts and routed through a clearing account she had never seen before. She did not recognize the vendor. She had personally approved every vendor contract. The Foundation had done some for the past 4 years. She sat at her desk that night after the building had emptied and pulled up every document she could access. The LLC had been registered in Delaware. The registered agent address was a mailbox service. There was one employee listed in a benefits enrollment form that had somehow ended up attached to a Foundation subfolder. A woman named Darlene Hoyt. Cecily did not know anyone named Darlene Hoyt. She photographed every page on her phone before the cleaning crew reached her floor. Then she closed everything, straightened her desk, and drove home. Vaughn was already in bed, already asleep, or pretending to be. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment and looked at him. 9 years. The man she had helped build something with. The man who had told her, 6 weeks into dating, that he had never met anyone who understood what he was trying to do. The man who had cried. Actually cried, to the guest room. She lay on top of the covers with her shoes still on and stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep. The first person she called was not a lawyer. It was her uncle, Fletcher Wren, not related by blood, but by the kind of loyalty that outlasts blood, had been her father's closest friend, and for the 12 years since her father's death, the person Cecily called when she needed someone who would tell her the truth without softening it first. Fletcher was 68 years old, and had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before retiring to a small house in Asheville where he kept bees and grew tomatoes and occasionally consulted for federal prosecutors when they asked nicely enough. She drove to Asheville on a Saturday morning in early March without telling Vaughn where she was going. She told him she was visiting a scholarship recipient's family. He did not ask follow-up questions. She spread the photographs across Fletcher's kitchen table while he made coffee. He put on his reading glasses without being asked and began going through them in the order she had laid them out. He did not say anything for 11 minutes, she counted. "This vendor," he finally said. "Ridgeline, yes, you've never contracted with them, never heard of them. And this clearing account." He tapped one of the photos. "Does this account number appear anywhere in your Foundation's official documentation?" "No." Fletcher took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Cecily, I know, someone has been running money through your Foundation. I know. Do you know whose money it was before it became Ridgeline's money?" She had thought about this for 6 days. I think it started as Aldridge Capitals, she said, specifically from the discretionary reserves. The variance in the quarterly reports is about 11% above what the foundation's actual operating costs would explain. Fletcher looked at her for a long moment. And you think Vaughan knew? I think Vaughan built it, she said. The bees were loud outside the window. The coffee finished brewing. Neither of them moved. There's something else, Cecily said. She pulled out her phone and opened the photo of the benefits enrollment form. The one with Darlene Hoyt's name on it. She's listed as a full-time employee of Ridgeline. Benefits package, 401k, the whole thing. But the enrollment form has a secondary contact listed. She zoomed in. It's Vaughan's direct cell number. Fletcher looked at the photo. He looked at it for a long time. Is this woman his employee? He asked carefully. I don't think she's his employee, Cecily said. The words settled into the kitchen like something physical. Ah, said Fletcher. She did not confront Vaughan. Not yet. She had learned something in 9 years of marriage about the difference between having information and knowing what to do with it. Vaughan was good with pressure. He had built his career on staying calm in rooms where other people panicked. If she came at him directly, he would reframe it. He would find the angle that made her look unreasonable. He had done it before. Smaller things, disagreements that had somehow ended with her apologizing for being upset, rather than him apologizing for the thing that had upset her. She needed to know more before she could afford to know less. She asked Fletcher to recommend someone. He gave her a name, a forensic accountant in Charlotte named Terence Boult, who had a reputation for working quietly and billing honestly. She met with Terence in a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon and handed him a USB drive with copies of everything she had. She also, for the first time, called the foundation's attorney. Not the firm attorney, Vaughan's people. Her attorney, a woman named Dottie Sachs, who had drafted the foundation's original charter and who Cecily had not spoken to in almost 2 years because there had been no reason to. Send me everything you have, Dottie said, after Cecily had talked for 20 minutes without stopping. And Cecily, don't touch anything else in those accounts. Don't move anything, don't query anything, don't give anyone a reason to think you know what you know. Not yet. Okay. Are you safe? The question landed strange. He's not. Vaughan isn't violent. I didn't ask if you were in danger, Dottie said. I asked if you were safe. There's a difference. Cecily thought about the guest room, the shoes she had kept on, the ceiling she had stared at. I don't know, she said honestly. Terence Boult called her on a Thursday morning, 11 days after she had given him the USB drive. He asked her to come to his office. She sat across from him at a desk that was very clean and very organized, and he spread a summary document in front of her. 4 pages, single-spaced, annotated. The total was not $900,000. The total, across a network of 3 shell entities including Ridgeline, over a period of approximately 26 months, was $2.3 million. The money had moved in a pattern consistent with what Terence called layered extraction. Funds drawn from Aldridge Capital's Community Reinvestment Reserve routed through the foundation's accounts as vendor payments, filtered through the shell entities, and ultimately deposited into accounts that Terence had been able to trace to a jointly held account in the name of Vaughan Aldridge and one Darlene Hoyt. They have a joint account, Cecily said, in both their names, opened 14 months ago. Terence paused. There's also a property, a condo in Raleigh. Title is in her name, but the down payment, $240,000, came from the same chain. Cecily looked at the document for a moment. He bought her a condo. The evidence suggests that yes. The room was very quiet. Through the window, she could see a delivery truck double parked on the street below, hazard lights blinking. He used foundation money, she said. Money that was supposed to go to literacy programs and scholarship kids. Yes, said Terence, he did. She was not going to cry in this office. She had decided that before she sat down. Can you certify this? She asked. Her voice was steady. The analysis, the documentation, can it hold up? I've worked with federal prosecutors, Terence said. Yes, this can hold up. She nodded once. She thanked him. She walked out of his office and sat in her car in the parking garage for 7 minutes before she was able to start the engine. Then she called Dottie Sachs. What happened next moved faster than she expected and slower than she could bear. Dottie filed a preservation notice with Aldridge Capital's board. A legal demand to freeze all records related to the Community Reinvestment Reserve pending an internal review. She did this without naming Vaughan directly, citing a material discrepancy discovered during routine foundation reconciliation. The board, 3 of whom were independent directors with no personal loyalty to Vaughan, complied within 48 hours. Vaughan found out on a Friday afternoon. He came home that evening differently than he usually did. There was no briefcase thrown down, no loosened tie, no scotch poured. He came in through the front door and stood in the hallway and looked at her where she sat on the couch, with a book she had not been reading. "What did you do?" he said. "I filed a preservation notice. You have no authority to." "I am the executive director of the Aldridge Family Foundation," she said, "which is the entity through which the funds in question were routed. I have every legal authority." She set the book down. Dottie agrees. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt. She had stopped looking for guilt weeks ago. Calculation. "This is going to destroy the firm," he said. "That depends on what the board decides to do about it, Cecily." He took a step toward her. "I can explain this. There are things about the capital structure that you don't." "Don't," she said quietly. He stopped. "Don't explain it," she said. "Don't restructure it. Don't find the version of this story that makes me the person who doesn't understand how finance works." She stood up. "I have Terence Bult's full analysis. I have 26 months of wire transfers. I have the joint account. I have the condo." She looked at him. "I have the benefits enrollment form with your cell number on it." The silence was the longest she had ever experienced inside a room with another person. "How long have you been building this?" he asked. And what she heard underneath the question was not remorse. It was something closer to professional respect, which was, in its own way, the worst thing he could have said. "Long enough," she said. She went upstairs. She packed a bag, not everything, just enough, and she left. She stayed with Dottie for 2 weeks, in Dottie's spare room above a garden that was just beginning to show early spring green. She ran the foundation remotely. She answered emails. She approved a grant disbursement to a workforce program in Mecklenburg County. She called her scholarship kids coordinator and confirmed that the spring awards would go out on schedule. The board's investigation moved quickly once it began in earnest. 3 independent auditors, a forensic accounting team, every record Terence had flagged, plus more. The picture that emerged was, in Terence's words, comprehensive. A word that somehow managed to be both clinical and devastating. Vaughan hired a team of attorneys. His mother, Mariette Aldridge, 71 years old, and the family's self-appointed guardian of its reputation, called Cecily 3 times in the first week. Cecily answered the first call. Mariette told her that she was making a mistake that would ruin everyone, that there were ways to handle things quietly, that the family had trusted her. "You trusted me with $12 million a year to run a foundation that helps families who have nothing," Cecily said. "Vaughan stole from that foundation. I don't think I'm the one who needs to be talking about trust." Mariette did not call again. The board voted to suspend Vaughan from his operational role pending the completion of the investigation. The vote was 4-1. The one dissenting vote was Vaughan's first cousin. What no one at the firm knew, what Vaughan himself had apparently believed was no longer relevant, was that Cecily had never changed her designation in one particular document. The original operating agreement of Aldridge Capital Ventures, drafted 11 years ago, when the firm was a $7 million startup and Vaughan was still figuring out what he was building, contained a provision. In the event that the operating partner was removed from his role, pending a legal or regulatory action, operational authority would transfer to the designated successor officer. Cecily had been listed as that officer since the document was first signed. She had not pushed for it, Vaughan had insisted. He had told her, in those early days before the money got large and the distance between them grew wider than either of them named, that he trusted her more than anyone else in the world, that if anything ever happened to him, he wanted the firm in her hands. He had apparently forgotten he had said this. The board had not forgotten. Dottie had certainly not forgotten. On the Tuesday morning that the formal suspension letter went to Vaughan, Cecily received a separate communication from the board's legal counsel delivered to Dottie's office. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for a moment. "Cecily," Dottie said from across the desk. "He listed me in the original operating agreement," she said. "Successor officer, operational authority." Dottie nodded slowly. "He did. Does that mean?" "It means," Dottie said, "that as of the moment that suspension letter was delivered, you are the acting operational authority of Aldridge Capital Ventures." She paused, "which manages approximately $2.8 billion in assets." Cecily set the document down. She thought about the folder of papers fanning out across the white linen tablecloth. She thought about Vaughan asking her what she thought she saw. She thought about 47 scholarship kids and a condo in Raleigh and a benefits enrollment form with a cell number she had dialed 10,000 times. She thought about her father, who had died 12 years ago, and left her something she had never opened because the attorney's letter had said, "Not until you need it." The envelope was still in a safety deposit box at a bank on Tryon Street. She had carried the key on her keychain for 12 years, without once being certain she would use it. She thought maybe now was the time. The safety deposit box contained 3 things: a handwritten letter from her father, dated 2 months before his death, a copy of a trust document, 47 pages, signed and notarized, and a single photograph of her father and a man she had never met, standing in front of a building she recognized. The original Aldridge Capital offices, back when they were still a storefront on South Tryon Street, before the firm moved downtown, before the glass building and the 14th floor and the $12 million foundation. Her father was in that photograph. Her father had been, according to the trust document, one of the original 3 founding investors of Aldridge Capital Ventures, a silent partner by mutual agreement whose stake had never been publicly disclosed, 40% of the original equity, which, through subsequent rounds of growth and the terms spelled out in the trust, had compounded into something substantially larger. Her father had never told her. He had told his attorney. He had told the trust. He had put the envelope in a box and given her the key and told her, "Not until you need it." She sat in the small room in the bank for a long time. Then she called Fletcher. "I need you to look at something," she said. "I'll come to you," he said. He did not ask any questions. Fletcher came that afternoon. He read the trust document at the table in Dottie's kitchen, glasses on, coffee going cold beside him. Dottie read it with him. They did not speak for a long time. "Your father never disclosed this to the board?" Fletcher asked. "He was the silent partner by agreement," Cecily said. "Vaughn's father, the original operating partner, wanted it that way. My father provided the seed capital. He didn't want the public role, and when your father died," the trust continued, "the stake passed to me. The terms are—" "Dottie, what are the terms?" Dottie had found the relevant section. The trust's beneficial interest in Aldridge Capital Ventures transferred to Cecily Aldridge, née Wren, upon her 30th birthday. She looked up. "6 years ago. I've owned this stake for 6 years, Cecily said quietly. "You have," said Dottie. "You just didn't know it." Fletcher took off his glasses. He rubbed his face with both hands. Then he looked at her with an expression she had only seen on him a few times in her life. At her father's funeral, at her college graduation, the day she told him she was getting married. "Cecily," he said. "I know," she said. "Your husband built his career on a firm that your father helped found. He spent 26 months stealing from a charitable foundation you built. He bought a woman a condo with that money." Fletcher paused. "And he forgot that you were listed as successor officer, and he had no idea about the trust." "He had no idea about the trust," she confirmed. The kitchen was very quiet. "What do you want to do?" Dottie asked. Cecily looked at her hands on the table. She thought about all the things she could say right now, about what was right, about what Vaughn deserved, about the scholarship kids and the literacy programs and the 40 families who were depending on the foundation to function. "I want the firm to survive," she said. "The employees didn't do anything wrong. The clients didn't do anything wrong." She paused. "I want the funds that were taken from the foundation fully restored, with interest, as a condition of any agreement. I want independent oversight of the community reinvestment allocations going forward. I want Darlene Hoyt's LLC dissolved and every dollar traceable to it recovered," Dottie asked. Cecily was quiet for a moment. "That's for the board to decide," she said. "And ultimately for the DA's office. It's not mine to decide." She paused, which is probably something he never expected me to say. The board meeting was on a Thursday morning in April. Cecily walked into the conference room on the 22nd floor, a room she had been in dozens of times as a spouse, at anniversary dinners and holiday parties and the occasional firm event, and sat at the head of the table. The board members looked at her. She laid 3 documents in front of them. Terence Boult's forensic analysis, the operating agreement with her name in the successor officer clause, and the trust document with a letter from the trust's attorney confirming the validity of the beneficial interest transfer. She did not give a speech. She did not perform. She walked through each document methodically, answered questions, and waited while the board's legal counsel conferred quietly at the far end of the table. When she was done, the room was very still. One of the independent directors, a woman named Carolyn Fitch, who had been on the board for 9 years, and who had always struck Cecily as someone who paid careful attention to things other people dismissed, looked at her for a long moment. "You've known about the beneficial interest for how long?" Carolyn asked. "Since this morning," Cecily said. "When I opened the safety deposit box, not earlier?" "No," Carolyn nodded slowly. "And the successor officer clause?" "Since Tuesday, when I received the board's communication about the suspension." Another board member, one Cecily knew to be friendly with Vaughn, leaned forward. "This puts you in an untenable conflict of interest," he said. "You're his wife, you're the person who filed the preservation notice, and you're now claiming operational authority and a beneficial stake." "I'm not claiming anything," Cecily said evenly. "I'm presenting legal documents. The conflict of interest question is a reasonable one, and I think independent counsel should advise the board on how to manage it." She paused. "But I'd also note that the conflict of interest in this room ran in a different direction for 26 months, and no one flagged it until I filed a preservation notice. The room went quiet again. Carolyn Fitch looked at her hands. Then she looked up. I think we need to recess for council review, she said. And I think when we come back, we have a significant amount of work to do. She paused. I also think you should stay. Cecily stayed. The divorce was filed in May. It was not contentious in the end, partly because Vaughan's attorneys advised him clearly that contesting it would compound his existing legal exposure, and partly because there was nothing left to contest. The firm's situation had clarified itself in ways that left little ambiguity about who held what. Vaughan Aldridge, 41 years old, former chief operating officer of Aldridge Capital Ventures, entered a cooperation agreement with the Mecklenburg County DA's office in June. The terms were not public, but they were, according to people who knew such things, not favorable to him. The firm did not collapse. Cecily had believed it would not, and she had been right. It had good people. It had solid client relationship. It had assets that were real and positions that were sound, and a community reinvestment program that, once the foundation's depleted accounts were restored, every dollar, with interest as agreed, would continue to do what it had always been meant to do. The 47th scholarship recipient that year was a 20-year-old from East Charlotte named Marcus Webb, who wanted to study environmental engineering. Cecily attended the small awards ceremony in late May, in a community center gymnasium with folding chairs and a banner that someone had printed slightly crooked. She shook Marcus Webb's hand and told him she was proud of him. He told her the scholarship had changed his life. She believed him. Fletcher came to visit in July. He sat in the garden behind Cecily's house, her house in her name, something she had quietly ensured during the divorce proceedings, and drank lemonade and watched the evening come on slow over the tree line. Your father would be very proud, he said. Cecily thought about that. She thought about a man she had lost at 24, who had left her a key and a box, and a letter that said, "Not until you need it." She thought about what it meant that he had spent his life providing quietly, without credit, without a name on the door. I think he'd be mad that I didn't open the box sooner, she said. Fletcher laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came up from somewhere. Maybe, he said, but you opened it when you needed to. That's what matters. They sat together in the garden as the light changed. The bees were loud. Somewhere down the street, someone was running a lawnmower. The world was very ordinary, in the way it only gets to be, when the difficult thing has finally resolved. Cecily held her lemonade glass and looked at the tree line and thought about what her father had built, and what Vaughan had tried to take, and what had happened when a woman who had been standing quietly in the background turned out to have been holding the whole thing up from underneath. The firm's next board meeting was in 3 weeks. She had already drafted the agenda. She was ready.